How's it going, everyone? I am Dylan. This is All You Can Board, and today I'm going to be talking about the new to me games that I played for the very first time last month. Now, this is in lieu of normally doing a what I played video. I normally do that at the end of every month and wrap up everything I played, but especially last month, I played 6 brand new games for the first time, which are the ones we're going to talk about today that I think are the most interesting to discuss, like first impressions on. And then I played a bunch that I had already played and talked about in previous videos, so I just felt like it would have been sort of retreading old ground. I don't think there was many new experiences or more I could add on to talking about those, whereas talking about these brand new games that I've never played before would be a fun time and I think interesting for everyone. So I decided this month I'm just going to do the new to me games and talk about those. I might even do this going forward unless I feel like a game I did play that I had talked about previously, I have something new to say. But otherwise, I think I'm just going to try to focus on some of the new games I've played and only do it when I have, enough to discuss. So we have 6 games that I played for the very first time last month. Some of them are like brand new titles. Other ones are games that have been out for a while. I just hadn't played them before. So I'm going to give you my first impressions on, I think the most I played any of these games is twice. Most of them I've only played once. So these are going to be very, very early first impressions on these games. You'll probably see us talk about these games in the future on the channel, more in depth or full on reviews once we play them more, but for now you get like a little taste from me. So the very first one we're going to talk about is a game I have done, I had to play on the channel for very recently that you may have seen, and that is Yak. So Yak is a brand new game. I think it came out in the last couple months, or at least that's when it was available to buy here in North America and Canada. And it is definitely a family style game. Basically in this game you're going to have this I don't want to call it a rondelle, but essentially there's this circle where these yaks are going to move around, and they actually have like legitimate yak figurines with carts that they're pulling with actual wheels on them and everything. There's a lot of high production value in this game. We'll talk about that in a second. But essentially, they're going to each be carrying different types of goods, and you are going to be looking to acquire certain types of goods that you can then trade in for blocks of varying colors, and you're using those blocks to build this, I can't remember what they call it in the game, but it's sort of like this the temple-like structure using these little stone cubes that come in varying colors, and you want to try to link certain colors together, and like having all the blues together, having all the oranges together. Sometimes you have extra objective cards that you need to have oranges, for instance, in very specific positions. So you're trying your best to score as highly as you can by the way you position them and when you acquire them. But to do that, you're going to be having to get these goods that are in the yaks, and they move around every single round, so you can kind of see what's coming your way. But then there's these fog tiles that can come out that can cause the yaks to turn 180 and go the opposite direction, which might screw up your plans. So lots of cool stuff going on, and but it definitely is a family weight game. And the reason I mentioned that is that having played it once, I had a really good time. I was pleasantly surprised with everything I was seeing from it. But it is also a game that I think over time, if you are a board game enthusiast and you have a large collection, you play a lot of deep strategy games, if you're looking to just play this game with just your friends, you may find that after a handful of plays or half a dozen plays, or maybe you get up to a dozen. It's hard to say with only having played it once. That over time, perhaps it's going to be one where you're like, I think I've seen everything this game has to offer now. But again, there also are a variety of objective cards that could come out in different pairings every round, or it might take you multiple games to experience all of them. So there is some definite variability and longevity there that you're going to get. But the one thing I do want to point out for sure is the production value, because the production value on this game is amazing. I think that it, especially because it is definitely targeting a crowd that may be playing with younger audiences at times, or is someone who appreciates this kind of production value. I think it was important and I see why they did it. Sometimes we hear production value in game criticized only because it can up the cost of the game and it can seem unnecessary. And while for sure, you can call the production value in here unnecessary in the sense that the Evertree and Everdell is unnecessary, it definitely adds to the table presence and it makes it a very inviting game to play, which in a hobby that we want to bring in as many people as possible all the time, that's something that we can't understate. And you can't just always fluff it off and say, why did they put all this effort into making these, actual carts and everything? We could have just been sliding something around or sliding the resources around. You could have saved a bunch of money, made the game cheaper. While all that may be true, I think this is the type of game that when it's set up on the table has that production value and actually, provides you a really fun time that is going to, give you multiple fun sessions for sure. It's important because it's going to be maybe a game that someone sees being played and they decide, hey, I want to check that game out, or I'm curious about it. And next, they're playing that, and now they're realizing, hey, I had a good time with board games. What else should I play? And then we got them. And they're here in the hobby to stay. So I just wanted to call that out. I am someone who really appreciates really good production value. I'm not always willing to pay the extra for it because they can get pretty pricey. But in the case of Yak, I think that it is just such a beautiful game when it's set up from the board to the components to the colors of stones that are going to be stacked up. It's just something that's going to look beautiful on the table, and I really appreciate games do that. So after having played it once, it's a game I definitely want to come back to. I'll say that first and foremost. I think that's usually a good size. You want to ask yourself, do I want to play this again? Yak, I definitely want to play it again. I played it with 3. I'd like to play it with 2 and with 4 and see how it differs. Depending on the player count, you have different restrictions coming out and different amounts of carts. So each cart has a restriction on them for what type of goods can be in the cart that's moving around. That's going to change depending on player count and the amount of carts that are out there. So there will be some variability that I want to explore different player counts. But like I said, my only I just want to add here, my only recommendation is that having even just played it once, there's something that's considered a variant where it adds these like public objectives. I would highly recommend you just play with them. Unless you're playing with a younger audience that's taking it a step too far in complexity. We played our very first game with them, and it did not add any complexity that we thought was going to hindered our experience. If anything, it added more to do and more to go after in terms of scoring, that without it I feel like I would have lost something. So that's my one recommendation, is I would just play with the variant right off the bat. I think it adds a lot to it. And I honestly highly recommend checking it out, even though it's a family weight game. I've covered a game called Bees on the channel, which was also a family weight game, and I had a great time with Bees, and it's a game I wanted to come back to and I wanted to explore, even though it had some of the same trappings, I would say, as Yak, where, over time it might be a game that you no longer need in your collection, hence why I was in my, games I'm getting rid of video. But that's me. That's someone who has like 100+ games that, doesn't have as much shelf space for family weight games that I'm only going to play, once a year or once every 2 years, or when I have the right audience for it. If you are someone who's playing family games often, which I know there's a lot of people out there, highly recommend you check out Yak, because my first play was really, really good. And we'll definitely cover it more either in a review or own a play it, skip it in the future, so you can see my full thoughts once I've played more of it and more of the player counts, and I'll tell you what my final thoughts are. But so far, I'm very impressed. So that is Yak. The next game that is brand new that I just played, and I've actually played it twice, this might be the only game on the list that I've played twice so far, is Fire and Stone. I don't have the copy here. That's Carlos got it at his house because he's going to be doing content on it. So you will be seeing either a full review or on an Own a Play It, Skip It or something from Fire and Stone in the future, likely from Carlo. But here you're going to get my first impressions. I haven't played it twice. I played it as a 2-player game, which is me and Carlo, and I played it as a 3-player game with me, Carlo, and Braden. So I feel like I've actually seen a lot of Fire and Stone because I feel like it's, having played it those 2 times, it's the type of game that after 2 or 3 plays, you kind of get it. There's more you can uncover. There's these cave cards in the game that there's a variety of different ones, and you only see one each game, so it's going to take you lots of games to go through those, which is cool. But I don't think it's going to be something that drastically changes my feelings on the game. So Fire and Stone is a really, really fun game. I'm actually really impressed by it. It's not quite, I think Carlo and I don't want to speak for him, he's going to eventually do a video on it, but me going into it, it's the creator of Carcassonne that designed it, which is something that I think Carlo's eye especially, and when I heard that, caught mine for sure. And because of that, I think I had this, higher expectation than is probably fair to have going into it, thinking, oh man, is this going to be, another classic like Carcassonne, which not every game can. I mean, maybe Carcassonne's not a classic for you, but it is definitely in the way that, people know that name of game. It resonates with a lot of people. I thought maybe that could be like, this will be like a modern day version of that. I don't think it quite hits those levels, and I think that was probably an unfair expectation for me to have. But that being said, I had a really good time with this. I had more fun at 2, but I still had a great time with 3, and I think each one sort of adds its own strategic complexities that's not present in the other player count that makes it worth playing at multiple player counts too. So basically what you're doing in this game is you're going to have these little, meeple-like figurines, and you're basically exploring this, world map that you start in Age 1 or Territory 1 that's, all fenced off, and you're not allowed to even venture into the Territory 2 until a certain amount of these like hut building tiles are flipped over. And then you can't go into H3 of the board until the same thing happens. So you have a certain amount of these huts that get flipped over. So when I say flipped over, you're probably wondering what I'm talking about. That's because every single space you can go to has this face down tile. They're all shuffled up. All the age 1s are randomly put on their age 1 sections, same with 2 and 3. I'm calling them age 1 and 2 and 3. It could be, it might be something else. I can't remember what they're called, but I'm calling them ages, whatever. So basically, every tile has, either I think there's like a bonfire underneath. It has its own. Each of these has its own ability that I won't get to all of them, but I'll explain some. But they can have a bonfire underneath. They can have a forest underneath. It could have the huts underneath. There's 2 tiles, I think, in the entire game that are these special tiles that have this extra bonus on them. So they all have this thing that you need to go to the space in order to reveal. So on your turn, whenever you land on a new space that has an unflipped tile, you're going to flip it and you're going to get the benefits of it. So bonfires are going to get you a point just for discovering it, but it's also going to create a new spot that you're able to go back to after you build a hut, because whenever you build a hut in this game, you have to return your meeple to a bonfire in your area that you're in. It's sort of like, not a penalty, but I guess it can be viewed as a penalty. It's not always a penalty, because sometimes you want to go back to that spot, but it is sort of this thing that's going to push you back further away from where you were. So the reason you're building huts is because it forms sort of an area control game. So when huts start getting built, other players can now build huts on those spots, and you get this area control competition. Everyone has their own private objectives too. They usually factor into this area control thing. You'll also get points for having 1 different territories. So that's really cool. You're exploring, you're doing area control, you're getting points for bonfires, and you have these private objectives. It may seem complex when I'm saying all this stuff, but honestly, the setup is probably the longest thing about this game, or I shouldn't say longest, like the most tedious thing about this game, because you have to flip all these tiles and place them all and everything. But like once it actually is all set up and you're taking your turns, it sort of just flies by, especially at 2 players, and that's what I loved about the 2-player game. Is the turns just go, and so the game is always sort of moving forward. You never have these slow down points. Even if someone is thinking about their action, their move, it's usually not for very long. So you're always sort of doing something or having it be your turn really quickly again, which keeps the game going at a really, really good pace, which I really loved about it. There are a couple things that after having played it just twice, I already see as sort of things that are holding back the experience a little bit. I love the area control aspect. I love that they've sort of inserted this into the game, and it's all based on where these huts start getting built. The problem I have with that is that in the game, you can't just build huts anywhere. You can only build a hut when you flip one of these tiles over. So no one knows where the area control spots are going to be, which in theory sounds cool. You don't know where you're going to compete and who's going to discover the spot to place the first hut. That's cool. But because the private objectives usually have to do with having huts built next or adjacent to certain spots, like it might say, win the most territories that are next to mountains or something like that. It is possible that you can just keep having huts get revealed and not next to mountains. You'll likely always have at least like 1 or 2, but you can't control that. So because of that, your private objective is sort of made less interesting, or can be less interesting, just based on randomness, based on RNG. If the tiles get flipped up next to mountains, you have more opportunities to fight for your objectives. If they're not, you didn't do anything wrong, you just don't have as interesting a private objective, which I thought was, a bit of a misstep. I didn't quite like that. But the actual act of competing for these territories, I liked a lot. And then there is this 1 cave token that'll get flipped over. I think it's an age 2. There's going to be a single cave card that is randomly selected and put face down from a pretty thick selection of cave cards. You're going to have to play tons of games to see them all. And the cave is going to add, an extra wrinkle into the game. So I don't want to go over a bunch of examples in case you want to just explore them for yourself, but it'll affect different rules in the game, changing them, eliminating them, adding to the rules, adding new things for you to do. Basically just something to sort of shift the experience from all the other times you've played. I think that's a really cool feature. I really enjoy it. The only thing I would say about it is I think that they could have been bigger game changers. I think me and Carlo and Braden, the first time we went in, were expecting the cave to shake up the game, and it just sort of was like, oh cool, it's just this extra thing that didn't, it added a little bit. And even the 2-player game we played, it was like, oh cool, like this. I think it gave me and Carlo each a power in that game to just, instead of placing a hut, you could remove someone else's and replace it with yours. So it was a little bit different. So it's a minor thing. It can have big ramifications, but I felt like the cave cards could have been even bigger game changer, so that you don't know what to expect. You may be planning, you can be having a good game, a bad game, whatever, and the cave coming into play could really shift the experience. I think that would have been cool, but that being said, they are still a cool addition to the game. So overall, I really am impressed with Fire and Stone. Maybe not quite as impressed as I was hoping to be when I first, was hearing about it and reading about it. But that being said, it is a game that even after having played it twice, I want to come back to multiple times. This isn't one I'm already thinking like, oh, I'll get in one player count of 4 just so I've played all the player counts, and then I don't know when I'll play this again. I actually do want to play this multiple more times because it was fun. I had a really good time with it, especially at 2. I can see this being a game that I'm playing with Carlo multiple times going forward, or Braden or whoever, because it's just a really solid 2-player experience. And at 3, you have more competition going on for the area control spots. I imagine 4 might be a bit much, and it might then slow down the game, which is one of the benefits, is how quick it moves. But it's hard for me to say that because I haven't played it at 4, so I'm literally just guessing. But that all being said, my first impression on Fire and Stone is that it is a really solid game, and one that I want to come back to and play again. And I think that you'll have if this sounds like a game that you're interested in, exploring and revealing tiles, and kind of having to play off what you reveal and where you reveal it, and doing area control things, and having this cave card that shifts the experience, and building huts and everything. If that all sounds, or any part of that sounds interesting, I would highly recommend checking it out, because I think it is a pretty solid experience. I would say, temper your expectations so you're not going in with them too high like I think Carlo and I did, so that you don't have to feel any sort of letdown, because I don't think this game deserves to make anyone feel let down. I think there's a solid game there. It's just not going to achieve, modern classic levels of board games in the way that, maybe something like Cascadia recently might, because of how popular it became. So that is Fire and Stone. Next up, we have another new game that I've actually been on my shelf, sitting back there, that maybe you're noticing right now. Hey, Radlands has taken the spot of a game that used to be up there. It's a game that Carlo and I both got. We both had our own copies. I still haven't played my copy, but I was at Carlo's and I played his copy as a 2-player game for the very first time, and I really, really enjoyed it, and that is Cafe. So Cafe is a little box game, a card game, I guess you would call it. It's mostly cards. There are some tokens, little cubes. That has a really interesting mechanic to it. And the mechanic's funny, because the mechanic that's interesting here, that intrigues me, is actually one that's present in some way, in some shape or form, in Smartphone Inc. And I didn't realize those two had it in common until recently. But anyways, so Cafe, basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to be playing these cards that are, sort of a little bit longer cards. Am I doing a good job of explaining the cards? Can you understand? I'm realizing I'm like, why am I doing this? They're basically just like slightly longer cards, in the way that Arboretum cards are, I think. And they are divided into 6 sections, I believe it is. So each of those sections is going to equate to one of the processes of making coffee that you're going to have to be undertaking, or they're going to be production spots that will produce new beans for you in a variety of colors, or it's going to be spots where you want to eventually, sort of at the end of the entire production, get your cubes onto a spot to basically score points. You have to it will require certain colors. It's basically the main way you're going to score points. It may ask you to deliver, 2 yellow cubes and 1 red cube. So your goal, because you have this card, is to deliver those cubes. The wrinkle here is that as you acquire new cards, you have to add them to your existing cards by covering a minimum of 2 spaces on a previous card, which means that you're going to be covering up production spots, or parts of the process of making coffee, or whatever else, and you're going to have to cover something. There are some blank spots on cards, but it is going to be, I would say, there's no way you're going to go through a game where you just cover blank spots. It's just not possible. You're eventually going to have to cover things that you set yourself up for. And because part of this game is, if you, let's say the first spot, production spot is drying. So you want to take these cubes that you produce, and you want to move them to the drying spot to dry the beans. If you have multiple drying spots next to each other, when you take that action, you get to take that action multiple times, or magnify the amount that you're able to dry. And because of that, you want to position cards a certain way. But then when it comes to start covering stuff up, you're going to have to make tough decisions like, well, I really, really want to play this card that I got, but every single spot I'd have to play it is going to have to cover up something good. So I'm going to have to cover up one of these drying spots because I can sacrifice 1, or I can sacrifice 2 because there's 3 clumped together. So you're kind of breaking your production that way. And the same way, if you link up the production spots where it produces new beans, new cubes, you're going to be able to produce more when you take that as an action. So you want to try to keep that going, but eventually you're going to have to probably break that up as well. So it's sort of this game that is constantly making you break your engine. And it's funny because we played Corrosion in the last few months, and we've talked about it on the channel in one of our own played Skip It's. And what I didn't like about Corrosion was the temporary engine building. You have these temporary engines that you have to replace, and your engine doesn't feel like it's constantly growing. It's growing for a bit, then it's gone. It's growing for a bit, then it's gone. And for some reason in that experience, maybe because it was so long and involved, I didn't like that aspect of it. Whereas in Cafe, I loved that aspect. That's what makes this game interesting. That's what makes the decisions interesting, is that you have these cards on the table and you're building this, what you think is this great system. You're like, oh, look at this production section I have, and look, I got every part of the actual production process, the drying and the roasting and everything, and here's where I'm going to deliver them. And then suddenly you're going to play a new card and you have to break something. Something's got to give. So you're constantly trying to weigh, what do I break? What do I sacrifice? Where do I add to? Can I add a card that's going to not break anything because it also has the icon that I'm covering? There's so much to think about in just placing a single card. That's what makes this game so much fun to play, and the reason that I want to come back to it so much now. And on top of that, I am a huge fan, I think Carlo is too, of games that are, just small box games, usually just cards with some tokens, that manage to make you just make the decisions very grueling, and in that there's either multiple good decisions, or every good decision has a consequence. Whatever that case may be, you can't just say, oh, I got a great card, I'm playing it. You have to think, oh, but where am I playing it? What am I covering? Do I want this card? Is it better than the card out there? Because it's the type of grueling decision that makes you just smile, makes you just realize you're having a good time. At least for me, it's kind of the same feeling I get from playing a game like Lost Cities. Everything about it is grueling, and yet I've had a great time because of it. Cafe is kind of that kind of game. You're always going to be making decisions that you're going to look back on and say, should I have covered that? Could I have done this differently? And that's going to kind of be what draws you back in to play it again. So it's inexpensive, it's small, doesn't take up a lot of shelf space, and I think it's going to be one that has tons of variability every time you come back to it. Maybe over time it's one you've kind of seen it all and you don't need to come back to, but I feel like it's going to take many plays to get there, many more than a game like Yak that we just talked about. So it's one that I cannot wait to play again, and I'm so glad that I bought my own copy at the same time Carlo did, because there's part of me that's like, oh, do I need my own copy? I'll just play Carlo's. But now, because of how much fun I had with this, and because it's not really a complicated teach, I think it's one I'm going to be trying to introduce to as many people as I can, so that I have tons of people in my life that I can say, do you want to throw down a game of Cafe, so I can selfishly play more of it myself, but also so I can introduce it to other people because I think they'd like it, and then maybe they'll buy it as well. So that is Cafe. I was pleasantly surprised, and I will definitely be playing this one again. All right, next up is another game that I don't own. It's Carlo's copy, and he actually has reviewed this game on, I believe it was an Own to Play at Skip It, but I had never played it before, and I played it with Carlo and his wife for the first time, and that is the Whatnot Cabinet. So the Whatnot Cabinet is a really simple game. Honestly, it's going to be such an easy teach, such an easy learn, but I think it's going to be one that I can see why. I think Carlo and his wife have played that game tons of times as a two-player game, from what I remember Carlo telling me, that they've come back to it often because of how easy it is to play and easy to set up and how familiar they are with it. And I get it now. I played it. It was a blast. I could see myself coming back to it constantly, like I do with games like Patchwork or Stellar or Seven Wonders Duel, Lost Cities, Cat Lady. These games that are not complicated to teach, but yet have enough strategy in them to make them worth coming back. And it's kind of like even Cafe that we're talking about, although Whatnot Cabinet is even simpler than Cafe. Basically what it is, you're gonna have this little storage cabinet, and there's gonna be 4 tiles, I believe it is, in this like market area, and everyone is going to be able to, on their turn, take an action to, in some way, shape, or form, take tiles either from the market or blindly from the bag to add tiles to their cabinet. And all these tiles are so these like interesting trinkets of different colors is the best way to describe them. So they'll come in a variety of colors, and one trinket may exist across all the colors as well. And you have to sort of create columns and rows that either match all the same color or match all the same type of object, or there's different requirements of what you're trying to do to get extra bonus points depending on the objective cards that are in that game. So it might say you want to have a horizontal row of all the same color and a vertical column of all the same trinket or something like that. And that's something that you're trying to accomplish that game. And if you're the first one to accomplish it, you take the objective card and no one else can claim it. So it's sort of a race to get to those objective cards, which is really, really good. I'm really happy that that's the way that they score, and not just, everyone gets the points if you complete the objective. It was way more interesting to have to race to that and see people claim them, and knowing that you may work towards something, and if you don't do it quick enough or efficiently enough, you won't get those extra points. And at the same time, just completing rows and columns will also get you bonus points according to these tokens that are placed around the board. Are they two? Now I can't remember if these tokens are placed around the board or if they're already just built into the board. I think they're placed around the board, but I could be wrong. They could just be built into the board. But regardless, they'll have a number, I think, from 1 to 4 or 1 to 3. That'll give you an amount of points if you complete that column or row. So you're also just trying to complete columns and rows to get extra points as well. So there's actually a lot going on, and what's interesting is you're not just sort of like a game like Cascadia. You're not just taking, I take this token and this token and I refresh them. You have this action board, and you have 5 choices of actions, and depending on which action you take, from left to right, left is the least powerful of the actions or least versatile, and the one on the far right is the one that is most versatile in the sense that it does the most manipulating of the board and probably gives you the most options. But depending which one you take, you're going to get pushed in turn order for the next round. So it's kind of like King Domino, if you've played that, where King Domino, if you take the better tiles, you end up delaying your turn on the next turn, so you're going to get a worse choice of tiles. This is the same thing. If you take a better action, you're likely going to have a later turn next round, which means you're going to have less choices of actions because everyone can only be on one action spot. So the actions could be something like, draw 2 tiles from the bag, keep one, add the other one to the market, and then choose from the entire market for your second tile. Or it could, there might be one, I can't remember all of them. I think one of them is like you draw 3 tiles from the bag blind, keep 2, and you don't even choose from the market. So that's sort of the one that's the most random. You don't know quite sure what you're going to get. And I think all the way in the end, there's ones where you just get a really good choice from the market. I think the last one is you refresh the market completely and then take 2 tiles. So you get like 4 brand new tiles to choose from, and then you get to take 2 of them. So there's a lot of different variety in the way that you're going to be grabbing from the board, and you have to always weigh, how much versatility, how much variety do I want in my choices, or am I just satisfied with I have so many things that I can get to fill these spots that I'm fine taking tiles randomly from the bag because I think I'll get something, and then I'll get first turn, next round I'll have more choices that way. So you're always kind of weighing that, while at the same time obviously racing to complete this objective. So you're trying to be efficient, but there's a little bit of randomness with what comes out of the bag, but no different than any tile game or game like Overboss or Cascadia or whatever, where you can't control what comes out. It's definitely not something that feels too overwhelming or too random as well. So I was pleasantly surprised by this game. It's one that I have a lot of games at this weight in my collection, so I don't necessarily feel like I need it in my collection, where it's not like I finished playing it and said I need to go buy this. But it is one that if all of a sudden Carlo got rid of, I probably would buy it because I want to have access to it to play it more. Having access to Carlo's copy and just playing it, at his place or him bringing it over, I think will be enough for me, because I know that him and his wife also enjoy it a lot, so I can imagine many situations where I'm going to get to play it. But it is a really great game, and it is really, really simple to teach and learn. So if that's sort of the type of game games you like to have in your collection, ones that offer that level of strategy and variety from game to game, but don't require much teach at all, much setup, or just much rules in general, this may be a game you want to look into. I don't know whether this is sort of a really popular title or one that's flying under the radar. I don't know. I learned about it from Carlo, and I haven't really heard many other people talk about it, but it is one that I think should be talked about more because it is a really, really solid game. And I think Carlo, spoiler alert, I think Carlo in his own play at Skip It said it should be an own, which is the highest rating you can get on that. So there you go. All right, 2 games left. The next one we're going to talk about is Sheepy Time. Now, Sheepy Time is a game that has been around for a little bit now, and I've heard talked about by a lot of people. Friends of ours, Foster the Meeple, if you watch their channel, they are big fans of this game, and I've heard them talk about it a lot. And Carlo and I hadn't played it, and Carlo got it, and we played it as a 3-player game with the 2 of us and our friend Raj, and it was a really, really good time. In the same way that Quacks of Quedlinburg or Cubitos is a good time. It's that style of pushing your luck game. So if right off the bat, if you don't like Quacks, if you don't like Cubitos, if you don't like these push your luck games that are, I would say, less strategic and more just based on, I guess there's strategy there on how far to push, but a lot of it can be random and just bad luck. If you don't like that style of just like fun games that can go off the rails even though you haven't really done anything wrong and just gotten unlucky, you probably won't like Sheepy Time either. That being said, I am a fan of those games. Quacks is a game I love playing, and Sheepy Time, it fits that mold, so I had a great time with Sheepy Time. I still think I like Quacks a lot more. I don't think I would buy Sheepy Time because I don't think I need to have Quacks, Cubitos, and Sheepy Time in my collection, but it is a really solid game. So basically what's going to happen is you're going to have this board that is like sort of a rondel, a circular board that you're moving your character across, and you're going to have this nightmare. And the nightmare, I think there's 3 different nightmares in the box, or 4 different nightmares, so you will have some variety in playing with different nightmares that have different abilities. And this nightmare is also going to be moving around the board, and there's this gate at one spot. You basically start at the gate, and you're trying to get around the board and jump the gate as many times as you possibly can. Every time you jump the gate, you can opt to stop and just wake up and be safe. You're safe for the night. You won't lose anything that you've acquired. But if you keep going and you get caught by the nightmare lands on your spot, or the nightmare jumps the fence, that ends the round. Or if it jumps in your spot, you're out, and you basically get this consolation prize, but you lose anything that you were trying to get as sort of like the top prizes. So what are those prizes? Basically, you have this scoring board that gets from, I think, 1 to 40, and your player, or 0 to 40, I guess, and all the players start in 0, and on the 40 spot, or I'm saying 40, it could be 50, I honestly can't remember what the exact number is, but on that last spot, you have this pillow token. To win the game, you just have to reach the pillow token, but it doesn't stay on the last spot on the point track. Depending on how many times depending on how many times you jump the fence, but depending if you finish in first or second or third place, depending on how many players you're playing with, each round, you're going to move your pillow a certain number of spots closer to you. So if it starts on 40, maybe you move it to 30 now, which means that every round it gets easier to reach your pillow. But at the end of each round, you reset your player character back to 0. So you're not just constantly getting further along. So you basically have to create a situation where your character reaches the pillow in a single round from 0 all the way to wherever the pillow is, which at 40 obviously is, I don't know if it's impossible. I don't know if it's possible to reach 40 in the first round, but if not, it's very, very difficult. So pushing that to 30 or to 25 or to 20, suddenly it's way more achievable to say, I can get this in this round, and you may push specifically to do that to win the game. That's where the push your luck element comes in, and that's what's so much fun about this, is it's a push your luck game done in a different way. Whereas Quacks is a bag builder, this is one where you have to sort of use cards in your, I didn't even mention, you have a hand of cards that is determining how you move around the board. So you're playing a card that might say, move 4 spots forward or whatever, and they're not all just like move like that, but they have different, ways that you're going to interact with the board, and you're using those to move around. So depending on how strong your hand is, and depending on, how it's looking for you, and depending where the nightmare is, that's going to determine whether you decide to pull out of the game when you cross the fence, or if you decide to push again. And lastly, you have these ability tiles that are getting added around the board, that when you when you land on the spot with these ability tiles, they're going to manipulate the board in some way. It may say that whoever lands there has to move 2 more spots forward, or you may have to move backwards, or there's other ways that it's going to interact with the board. I won't get into them all, but essentially that's going to create some more variety. So you're not just moving around the board. Now you're placing these tiles in such a way that maybe you can create yourself a bit of a, I don't want to say an engine, but something where hey, if I land on this spot, it's actually going to propel me forward. There's one that's, I think, a trampoline that actually says, when you land on it, jump 3 spots forward or something like that. So you can use that to jump over the fence, and maybe when you jump over the fence, you land in a spot that pushes you again. So you can get this sort of engine going where suddenly for a single card, you end up moving around the entire board and creating these really memorable moments that everyone potentially has access to if they can land on that spot as well. So it's a really good experience, but again, you're going to have to be into that sort of random factor in board games and that push your luck element. It's not for everyone. There will be situations where you feel like you've done nothing wrong, and it's just, I just drew poor cards, or the nightmare landed on me 3 times in a row, and I feel like that was just completely bad luck. That's going to happen, and you're either going to just laugh it off and say, oh my god, I'm having such a bad luck game, or it's going to frustrate you and you're going to say, I hate when this is out of my control and I've done nothing wrong. So depending on what type of gamer you are, I think that is going to determine whether you have a good time with this game, or this genre of game in general. But for me, I had a really good time with it. It doesn't quite achieve Quacks level for me, but I think I might like it more than Cubitos. It's hard to say. I'd have to play them both. I'd have to play Cubitos again. It's been a while, and I'd have to play Sheepy Time again, and probably close together to see which one resonates with me more. But I think Sheepy Time is one that I'm going to want to come back to, especially because Carla owns it, just to experience it more, try other nightmares, and see what it has to offer. It was a really fun time, and yeah, as long as you're okay with getting absolutely screwed over one game, and even though you did absolutely nothing wrong, and it's probably of no fault to you. But that is Sheepy Time, and you should check it out. The last game we're going to look at, I guess we're not going to look at it because it's not here, is a game called Fantasy Realms. This is the one I had. I think this is definitely an older game. I can't remember how old it is. I don't even want to guess because I'm going to butcher it. But it's not a brand new game by any means. It might be like a 2016, 2017 release. I honestly can't remember. Anyways, Fantasy Realms is this really small box card game that Carlo introduced me to. I had never heard of this game, didn't know anything about it, probably never would have checked it out because I wouldn't say the artwork in it is anything that's, overly striking or anything like that. It kind of has a bit of an older style look to it, but it is so simple and so much fun, and it's a fantasy theme, which is usually up my alley. So basically, you're going to have a hand of cards, and you're trying to score points for the cards that are in your hand. On your turn, you can either draw off the top of your deck, or you can take from the discard pile. Once the discard pile, or a discard row, I should say, reaches 10 cards, the game ends. Which means that if you're discarding too many cards, you're going to end the game quicker. So you're having to kind of keep that in mind, because a game could all of a sudden, you could have a game that goes really quick just because everyone's discarding these cards. Or there could be one where everyone's taking the discard pile of cards and it's not really, building up, and then the game goes on longer because of it. Every card is going to score differently, and this is where the game gets interesting. This is where I had a really good time with it. Certain cards are going to need other cards that are in the deck to in conjunction to be able to score when you play your hand at the end of the game. So it might say, I'm going to forget all the names of the cards because I've literally only played this the one time, or I think we played it twice back to back, but I've only had that one session, I should say. But you might have a card like, for instance, let's say you had a card that was the king, and it might say the king is worth 5 points, but if you also have the queen, it's worth 55 points. You're at an additional 50 points. And the queen might say something similar. So getting those two cards together suddenly scores you a ton of points, and you just have to have them both. You're looking for one in the discard pile. Maybe if you notice someone pick up a queen from the discard pile and you get a king, you're not giving that to them. But regardless, you're trying to get these cards in conjunction with each other. Then you'll have other cards that'll say, this card scores 10 points for each soldier card you have, or for each forest card you have, and so now you're trying to collect a bunch of that type of card to play in conjunction with this. You may have a card that has, scores you a lot of points, but has this negative effect in the box, and you have to weigh whether or not you want to use it. Whereas you have another card that its ability is clear the text box of another card, which means you can clear the penalty on that card. So there's so many combos, there's so many combinations that you can have with different cards that even having played it twice, yes, there's some that are obvious, like if you have this card, you want to try to get this card. But there are other cards that it's not quite that straightforward. Or you might have one where it's like, how hard do I go into this card that says it scores 10 for every forest or 10 for every disaster or whatever? How hard do I go into that compared to going for some of these more intricate, rarer combos that'll be more beneficial if I were to hit them? So it's strictly a hand management game that's about, acquiring cards, and there's going to be some luck involved for sure on what cards you get dealt, what comes into the discard pile, and when it comes in there, who's able to grab something before you, for instance. But because it plays so quick, I find that the quicker the game plays, the less it matters that there's randomness, because you can just play another game really quickly, and likely with Fantasy Realms, you'll play multiple games in succession. So having played it twice back to back, both games felt different. One, I felt I had a stronger game. One, it was a weaker game, and I felt like I was just getting bad luck. But everyone could be having that. So it's not just because you're having a game that you feel is like a lower scoring affair that all of a sudden you're out of it, because maybe everyone else is having that same problem. You just don't know. And maybe what you do is you discard cards quicker to try to speed up the end game, to try to end the game before they get the cards that they're looking for. So lots to explore with Fantasy Realms. The theme is great, tons of combos to explore. It's going to take you multiple games to go for them all, and it's exciting when you go for one. I think there's one card called the Candle. I can't remember what it needs to be paired with, but it's a card that I think is worth like 1 point or 2 points or something like that, but it's worth plus 100 points if it's paired with a certain card, or you have a certain combination of 3 cards or something like that. I feel like that would just be fun to say, hey, when am I ever going to be able to have a game where I can successfully pull off the Candle combo or something like that? Like, you can purposely pursue certain things to try to say, hey, I pulled this off and I was able to, you know, score 100 points from it or whatever. There's a lot to explore from it that way. It's definitely one I want to come back to, and it's actually one I actually want to own myself. This is one, even though Carlo has, I want to get because I think I will play this enough with other people as well. And for such an inexpensive, small game, it's not one that is going to take up a bunch of space on my shelf, but I'm not going to play it enough that I'm going to be worried about, and it's not going to hurt my wallet to buy it. So if you haven't heard of this game, I'd honestly recommend checking it out. For such a small box card game that is that inexpensive, I think you'll get a lot of mileage out of it, and those are some of the games that I think, you know, land the most with people because they don't they don't demand a lot of your wallets, they don't demand a lot of your time, but they add a lot of variety every single time you play. So that is Fantasy Realms. And those are the 6 brand new games that I played, or I shouldn't say brand new games, new to me games that I played in the last month. And I honestly didn't have a stinker this time at all. If I do this in the future, or when I do this in the future, I'm sure there's going to be ones that I play that I just don't enjoy. In this case, I enjoyed them all to varying degrees. If you're curious, out of just the initial plays of all these games, which one is my favorite, I don't know why I put myself on the spot with this. I would say it's probably Cafe or Fantasy Realms so far. It's hard for me to decide which one of those two. I'd have to play them both again to know for sure. If you made me choose, I think I might like Fantasy Realms ever so slightly more, but again, I'm putting myself on the spot for God knows what reason, and it'll take more plays for me to know for sure. But you'll likely see all these games come up in different videos we do in the future with final thoughts and or full reviews or own to play and skip it, whatever the case may be. So you'll definitely see them covered. But I enjoyed them all. If you have any questions about any of these games, leave a comment. I'd be happy to answer them. Or if you're intrigued by any and check them out for yourself, let me know what your experiences were either in the comments or on Discord. You can message me there, or just post it into one of the threads and have a discussion going on about it. Love to hear what you think. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.